An important part of North African Islamic culture are the nomadic people who live on the sort of boundaries of so many of these nations and are able to continue their life in this dispersed and, nomadic way. We see a number of them here in this region. A large number of them are of Berber descent. Berbers are the older indigenous inhabitants of North Africa who lived around the Atlas Mountains and a part of the trans-Saharan trade known as the Tuareg. Among these people, they have many unique and older traditions which have persisted even as they converted to Islam. Two of the more striking designs of the famous Berber jewelry is the Hamsa Design, which is a symbolic gesture done to protect one against the evil eye or black magic. The Hamsa Design is a design that's patterned after a pair of hands, one on top of the other, where the thumbs are sort of pointed to the sides. And this, as I said, is indicative of this idea of a protection against people who might do you harm with black magic. Another very interesting design is the Fibula of Morocco. You can see how this jewelry is designed with this very interesting latch attachment on the upper portion there. That spike part between the two sort of horseshoe shapes is sort of pierced through the cloth and is used to holding back a kind of garment over the back. It's actually based on a Roman design that spread throughout the region and influenced jewelry and other aspects of Berber culture. If you look at these two designs, you'll notice that there is no kind of decorations or ornamentation which specifically refers to any living thing. And that is a part of their sort of Islamic heritage, where they have a preference for geometric designs. Now let's look at the Tuareg of North Africa and some of these other nomadic peoples. You can see the Tuareg, they move between an area from the south in Burkina Faso to Mali, Niger, Algeria, and as far away as Libya. And they were very important in this trans-Saharan trade, bringing salt from the north and trading with gold and ivory in the south. And they were this kind of niche that was very important in this, very wealthy area that was able to connect across this inhospitable Sahara Desert. The Tuareg used camel caravans, a primary role up until the mid-20th century. They are predominantly Muslim, though they are not considered Arabic. Their designs and their lives are very functional, very pragmatic. They have a beautiful sense of ornament and detail for decoration, but every part of their lives has to fit onto the back of a camel, be packed up tightly, and carried hundreds of miles across the desert. So in their lives, these objects you see here, these are actually sort of backboards where they would stick into the sand, and then household objects or clothing can be draped over them, and then they were used as a kind of backrest, as a kind of a seat for somebody of importance. The Tuareg have this sort of deep indigo clothing, and they often, you see the men wearing a veil, unlike the women who tend to go unveiled. They believe wearing a veil is a kind of symbol of power and a way of kind of controlling and maintaining their status as men. There is a big division between what is considered women's work and what is considered men's work. And one of the important skills and crafts that women work on is leather working. And here you can see this El Jibira, which is this sort of large leather bag decorated with straps that would hold clothing and other important family items that would be strapped onto the back of a camel for migration. See all the stitching and fine patterning that goes into this leather work here. The men are known for their metalsmithing and their metalworking, and the takuba is the traditional sword of the Tuareg. The design is actually also based on a Roman sword. You ever seen ancient Roman swords? You see that they have that straight, flat, black cross in the handle, and that the sword here would be forged by the men, and then the women would be responsible for doing the scabbard and parts of the hilt and handle. Another very interesting cultural similarity between the Tuareg and ancient Egypt. Notice the design of the bed we see here in ancient Egypt. This series of a structural form that is overlaid with blankets and other padding so that the person is off the floor. This design has been maintained over the centuries, millennia really, by the Tuareg people. Tents and tenting is an essential part of the life of a nomad, and the architecture of the tent and the design and upkeep and building of the tent, it falls squarely in the responsibility of the women's work. For the most part, very rarely have people studied this work and how it's done, but few people have ventured out to come to understand the extraordinary sophistication of this mobility that the Tuareg depend on. So here you see them bending pieces of wood. They must carry all the stakes and poles that they're going to use to build their house. There's very little in the desert that will provide them for their shelter, and they must be able to carry everything they need. They will use rocks and other sort of weights to kind of hold things down, but for the most part, they carry it all on their backs. The camel has a very peculiar anatomy that makes it very difficult to create a kind of efficient load-bearing structure. You see how the design of the camel, making sure its load is even and equal, sufficiently and carefully strapped onto the camel so that it can carry its load effectively. Here we see Gabbro women building a tent on a new site. And you can see how the construction of the tent, and there are several different kinds of designs. One is a kind of true tent where a structure is kind of suspended by poles. Another one, like you see here, is actually sort of not a true tent because the whole structure is kind of a kind of framework that is woven together and then overlaid with materials for protection. One of the interesting things about the way in which the tent and women and their role and their responsibilities are kind of conjoined in the family is the way the marriage ceremony celebrates this homemaking in a very literal way. The wife receives her new home as a dowry from her mother, so all the materials that she will need for her home is provided for her by her mother. And the husband is really sort of invited into her home. She owns that house, and if the man wants to divorce her, he literally has to leave her house. She cannot be kicked out of her own home. So this, I'm sure, gives her a little bit of leeway in negotiations if anything go wrong. So in this wedding ceremony, you can see here sort of ordinary camel travel, and then this one on the right here, this very much more fancy and elaborate marriage camel travel. There's a special ceremonies that involve the bringing about of this family together, which involves a kind of practice of kind of putting up and taking down the marriage tent, and the kind of ceremony of that the family must, in this area sort of do this multiple times as a way of kind of demonstrating their ability to survive as a family. Here, the wedding tent is called a AFR1, and the word for wife and the word for tent is the same word. It's ehen. In this figure here, you see the ceremonial construction, relocation, and reconstruction of the Gabra tent within its kraal. So they have this sort of walled area. And first it's built in the center, then they take it down, they sort of parade around the exterior of the kraal, they come back in and they set it up in place two. Then they're there for a week, and then they take it down, they parade around the perimeter, they come in and reset it up in place 3 for a whole week, and then again to 4, and finally to 5, and the marriage ceremony is complete. So this whole elaborate ritual is again this practice of putting up, taking down, and effectively rehearsing what will be their whole lives together.